Welcome, everyone. Here we are at today's panel, Writing Inspirations, with Linda Spalding, Harold Johnson, and Peace Akintade. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that the Festival of Words takes place and is broadcasting from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, located on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. And we are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. We feel it is important for us to acknowledge Treaty 4, but would like to point out that this is more than just a string of words or a token used in reconciliation. So we invite everyone in attendance to consider how our acknowledgement of treaty land goes beyond the words themselves into something more mindful and meaningful and useful, where we are active participants working to reconcile and rebuild relationships with the Indigenous people with whom we share treaty territories. We also prioritize equity and the mental and emotional safety of marginalized groups, for example, people of color, LGBTQ+, and disabled people, over the comfort of others. This is a safe place for everyone, and hate speech, insults, or rude remarks will not be tolerated. If you see something that concerns you, please contact one of the moderators or the festival directly. Also, this festival will not be possible without the support of our major funders. So we would like to thank the Saskatchewan Arts Board, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, and the Government of Canada, as well as a long list of program funders that will be shown at the end of this event. If you're in a business that you know supports the festival, please be sure to thank them for their support. And I'm Farzana Doctor. I am in Treaty 13 land right now, based in Toronto, and I'm the author of 4 novels, and I'm happy to be moderating today's panel, and I wish that I could be there in person in Moose Jaw instead of online, but that's life. So I'm going to just introduce each reader here, each writer, and they're going to read for a few minutes. So first off, I'd like to introduce Peace Akintade, who is an African-Canadian poet, public speaker, and thespian residing in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. She's Saskatchewan's Youth Poet Laureate and coordinator of Write Out Loud, a Saskatoon-based youth poetry community. She's a playwright for the Obsidian Theatre 21 Black Future Project and a youth speakers bureau for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. Her poems touch on the impact of colonization in her village, colorism, growing up in Kuwait, Nigeria, and Canada, and relearning her culture with art. Let's welcome Peace Akintade.
Thank you very much for that introduction. The first poem that I'm going to be reading to you is pretty much going through my journey with religion, Christianity, and colonialism, and what my philosophy and morals have changed over the years. So I'd like to introduce Holy Man. If I ever fall on my knees to worship my prisoner, rename me as holy. Holy is the name of my villain, whose more trigger words and self-denial, whose more Christian music played on a loop to drown out my siblings' cry. I pray, like washing my hands in a well of sin. I pray, like destroying past lovers and misguided friendships. Teach me, trauma, how you grip me so willingly. I remember sitting on the brick road, listening to the radio station say, heroes are always winning. If heroes are always winning, then I must win with an iron fist, because I see God in the mirror, living underneath an inscription of self hatred, mad for disruptive knowledge. Like when we look at the burning embers of the city, let us laugh and rejoice at our victory. When the wind is falling apart and the sun begins to fail, when the earth spits us out, you will still be here. You, more villain than monster. You, more urban day witchcraft and crystal demon summoning than me, wishing to be a protagonist, a hero, that when I look in the mirror, I see a creation, a specimen deserving of victory, the answer to someone's prayer, the gold webbing through a cracked pottery, slowly sinking through the cracks like she belongs there. But when I look in the mirror, I see a human. She looks more like a stress consumer than heavily body, but my reflection will show power and some days starvation. My starvation holds me tightly for inspiration. My inspiration are shackles I carry on my shoulders, bracing myself for the divine whip of love. Let us all as a congregation repent our desires for a better world. Let us make the chairs our goddesses and the carpeted fools our ruler. Our regrets shall be omnipotent because we are humans, humans more obsessed than fear, humans more unfinished journals than self discovery, but humans more gullible and lovable. Humans who carry their shackles and attach it to themselves, not to the wall nor the rocks, not attached to their livestock, but you carry your shackles on your shoulder. And I wonder if we fell in love with our prisoner, and if we realize poison does not make us gods. Thank you. Um, I had a another poem. It's a really quick poem, and it has to do with again internal monologue. I call this an internal monologue of what is going through my head every single time when people ask me about creativity and my process. It's a claustrophobic mastermind screaming in my ears. It's Black Panther's fist fighters asking for my head. It's the gun sounds and 6 a.m. whispers by the bed. It's lofi music playing, asking if I'm still here. It's staying in my room, starfished and bare, counting the ceiling stars while my head sticks to the fear, counting the ticking clocks, knowing they wish for my dread. It's like if the world recognized my trauma, I would be someone worth listening to. To my mother as siblings, my shadow will keep you company. I have no more of myself to give, but I am happy, I'm fulfilled, I'm young, and we still have so much of life to give. What am I running towards? What am I running towards? What am I running from? I'm running from the pressure, the societal force that says immigrants must work harder for the opportunities made by their oppressor. I'm running from the pestering, the fighting, the unspoken treaties, the evolutionary thinking that my work is my worth, the unfathomable torture that influenced my vision. Everyone has a gift to share, and my basket is written. Why demonize my passion? At 10, I've already sold my soul to the Lord. Why demonize my passion? The first advice my mother ever gave me was to hold a comb as you would a knife, an extension of your heritage dipped in lizard blood and coconut oil. There's a reason we do not distribute our roots. Each pull of our hair cries, symbolizes a cry. Messy buns made from Afro bites, big enough to chew slowly. Ancestors, I have ascended my natural state. I have seen my future self and cried that butter taste. And it's a messed up mastermind that guilts my process. It's a buffer solution to all the injustice. It's carrying the world as if others will notice. Have you noticed the way my people dance backwards towards music? One feet intertwined with another, cuddling the trauma, hoping it would listen. And they tell me my descriptions remind them of love. So I tell them the story of the woman and the bear, the blind lady, the fox, tortoise, and dog. And they say my fables are demonic. Our lizard blood tastes like honey. While they pay for my advice and story, not knowing each tale comes with a warning. Mr. Businessman making tokens of our culture forgot earth resembles our color. Ancestors, why does my head stay too close to the pillow? And to complain is to lose gratitude. Ancestors, what am I running towards? What am I running towards? What am I running from? What am I running from, Lord? Is my soul not enough? It's the claustrophobic mastermind screaming in my ears. It's the restless time lords asking for a share of our sheltered heart crafted by death. It's never learning boundaries, and the fear of rejection is tokenism mixed with imposter syndrome for the ocean, for being a second choice. For my words taste like ashes, too bad no one loved the taste of earth. For the sea, for the feeling of rejection, flowing over my scarred calves, never spreading far enough to reach my heart. For the trees, I miss our quick conversation, texting each other bittersweet confession. For the sand, for the way it grounds me firmly, for holding my secrets, the past, present. For my family, who deserve more than I give them. What is the price of wisdom? My heart becomes my home. We are young, we are free. I still have so much of the world to see. Let it go, let it go, let it go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peace. You sent that to me earlier this week, and it's such a different experience to hear you read it and perform it out loud. So thank you
Mhm.
so much.
Thank you.
So next, I'd like to introduce Harold R. Johnson. He is the author of 5 works of fiction, 4 works of nonfiction, and 1 genre-bending publication. His book Firewater was shortlisted for a Governor General Award. He worked as a miner, logger, and served in the Canadian Navy before obtaining a Master of Law degree from Harvard University. After a legal career, he is now happily retired to his trapline where he lives and writes along with his wife, Joan. And he'll be reading today from the Bjorken sagas, which come out in October.
And I left the trap line in October. We have moved to Gabriola Island. It's a brand new experience. Um, there's no explanation necessary for what's happening here. It's how I came to find the sagas. I kept the speed down on the way back. The road was rough and I didn't want to bounce Joe, but mostly I didn't want to get there. Thank you, Joe said. His voice surprised me. I'm glad I'm going to die with my pants on. I don't care that I'm wearing a diaper. At least I have my pants on. Maybe when we get home, you'll help me put on a pair of moccasins, eh? Yeah, sure, Joe. No problem. The way I heard it, after you leave here, you have some walking to do to get all the way over to the other side. That is probably the longest sentence I'd ever heard Joe speak. He kept talking. That little gray suitcase, you keep what's in there for yourself. There's not much left. I used to have it pretty much full. And you know how it is. The price of fur going to shit the last while. Barely worth anything anymore. You know what? I'm glad I'm going. I don't owe anybody a damn thing. He had to stop and catch his breath. That many words all in a row had taken his energy. A while later, he started to talk again. 101. Not many make it this far. You know what? I never gave anything to the government of Canada, and I never took anything either. I thought about that. Joe had been a trapper. He sold his pelts and was paid in cash. Nothing for the government to trace, no income tax, but also no pension. Something started to make sense. His modest list of items from town, his insistence on seeing the receipts, and the sour look on his face when he saw the rising prices of those modest items. He didn't have a health card, and for sure he wouldn't have a social insurance number. He'd never owned a vehicle, so he wouldn't have a driver's license. I suddenly envied him. He was the self sufficient ascetic that I aspired to be. Only he had done it, and I just talked about it. Do you remember seeing an old wolf around these parts last winter? He asked. I was trying to think back when he continued. You remember? He was kind of reddish, more red than tan at least. He used to hang around the river mouth. I'd see him every once in a while, always alone. Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. I did remember seeing a lone wolf walk past our cabin on the ice. I saw where he ended up. Joe took a moment to breathe. I came across him just as the snow was beginning to melt. The ravens got to him first, and that's how I found him. They cleaned him up pretty good, but I was able to read what happened to him. He stopped talking for a couple minutes. I thought he was done. Then he said he was off the trail about 10 feet underneath a spruce tree. When I found him, I thought, that's a good way to go. Just step off the trail and lie down, and curl up and wait for the end. I couldn't ask for better for myself. Is that what you want, Joe? You want me to leave you under a spruce tree? If you would, please, he answered. So that's what I did. There was a big old white spruce just a little way down the shore from the dock in front of his cabin. I had to clear away a couple of branches, but I got him sitting up with his back against the trunk. Then I went to find his moccasins. I just finished putting them on his feet and I was tying up the wraparounds when Joe seemed to levitate for a moment. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, and I moved back for a better look when he slumped onto his side. I was going to help him sit up again, but then I saw it was over. He slowly pulled up his knees and tucked his chin against his chest. His breath rattled gently, and then he was still.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And a wolf appears in this one too. Going to ask you more about that later. So next I'd like to introduce Linda Spalding, who was born in Kansas and lived in Mexico and Hawaii before immigrating to Canada in 1982. She's the author of 4 critically acclaimed novels: The Purchase, which was awarded the Governor General's Literary Award, and Daughters of Captain Cook, The Paper Wife, and with her daughter Esta, Mare. Her nonfiction includes A Dark Place in the Jungle, Riska, Memories of a Dayak Girlhood, and Who Named the Knife. In 2003, she received the Harbourfront Festival Prize for her contribution to the Canadian literary community. She lives in Toronto, where she is an editor of Brick magazine, and she's going to be reading from The Purchase. Please welcome Linda.
Thank you, Farzana. Okay, I'll just get into it, and then we're gonna talk a little bit after. This is pretty short, so and this is from The Purchase. I don't know why I hadn't read it or from it for such a long time, and I got kind of intrigued and when I was looking for something to read. So I'm almost reading unfamiliar word. It's been such a long time. And this is the very beginning of the book. Daniel looked over at the daughter who sat where a wife should sit. Cold sun with a hint of snow. The new wife rode behind him like a stranger, while the younger children huddled together, coughing and clenching their teeth. The wind shook them, and the wagon wounded the road with its weight, and the river gullied along to one side in its heartless way. It moved east and north, while Daniel and all he had in the world went steadily the other way, praying for fair game and tree limbs to stack up for shelter. "We should make camp while it's light," said the daughter, who was 13 years old and holding the reins, but Daniel wasn't listening. He heard a wheel grating and the river gullying. He heard his father, the memory of that lost, admonishing voice, but he did not hear his daughter, who admonished in much the same way. Sometime later, the child pulled the 2 horses to a halt, saying again that they must make camp while the sky held its light. The new wife arranged dishes on the seat of the wagon, and the child, whose name was Mary, pulled salted meat out of a trunk at the back. It was their 5th day on the road, and such habits were developing. By morning, there would be snow on the ground, the fire would die, and the children would have to move on without warm food or drink. They would take up their places in the burdened wagon, while Daniel's fine Pennsylvania mares shied and balked and turned in their tracks. A man traveling on horseback might cover 100 miles in 3 days. but with a wagon full of crying or coughing children. The mountainous roads of Virginia were a sorrow made of mud and felled trees and devilish still growing pines. The children, being young and centered on their own thoughts, were only dimly aware of the hazards of the road and of the great forest hovering. They hardly noticed the mountains, which were first gentle and then fierce, because all of it came upon them as gradually as shapes in an unhappy dream. The mountains only interrupted a place between land and sky. The forest got thicker and darker on every side. They had, within a few weeks, watched their mother die, given up home and belongings, landscape and habits, school and friends. They had watched people become cold to them, shut and locked doors to deny them entrance. How were they to understand? There were other wagons leaving Pennsylvania and going south and west, but none were so laden with woe as the one that carried the 5 children and the widower and his new bride.
Thank you so much, Linda. I really enjoyed reading. I read your the latest book, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's interesting that you found something fascinating to read in a previous work. I think sometimes we forget to go back, right, and look at our work. And yeah. So let me get to questions for all of you, and feel free to jump in. I know it's a little bit complicated online, but if you want to jump in and you're having trouble, just wave, and I will try to get to you. But I'll also call on each of you individually to try to get your answer. So if you can just talk a little bit about what you just read and the inspiration behind that, so that people can understand maybe the backstory. If there is some backstory, feel free to get into a little storytelling about what you just read. So maybe I'll just start with Peace.
Yes, so I guess the second poem is actually the easiest to explain. It's an inner monologue. Throughout this year, mostly during COVID, a lot of people have come to me and keep on asking, why do you keep on writing? Why do you keep on performing? Isn't this the time to take a break? Why do you need to keep running towards something? And I said, because there's no other way to calm my mind. There's no other way to calm the voice that are inside, Writing is a form of release. And I really wanted to get that across, the hectic need to have all of my thoughts on paper. And that is what poetry is to me. The first one that I did, Holy, that one has a bit of a backstory. So my background is Christianity. But I've also been learning about the history behind Christianity from a more academic look since I started university, and looking at religion as not a form of lifestyle, but as a form of how did it happen, how did it begin. And what I came across was almost the beginning of Christianity from a colonial look. In my village, in my tribe, there was a lot of religions, quote marks, that had like lizard blood and honey and burning oranges to ward out bad dreams and all of those kind of things. But then missionaries came to that village and deemed it as voodoo magic, black magic. And because of that, Christianity became the good source of it. Even though there are in our mythologies and African mythologies, there are ways that, like the creator, for example, is in there. It has been completely demolished because of Christianity became the face of what it is to truly be in salvation. So holy was a manifestation of me trying to justify what it means to be a Christian. And the answer I came in is that we'll never truly know. We'll never truly know which is the right religion, which one we should be celebrating. But one thing we do know that is that we are all humans. I'm flesh and blood talking to another flesh and blood. And that has become a bit of my philosophy going forward. So yeah, those are the two kind of ideas between those two poems, and they work together in a weird sort of way.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And maybe I'll turn towards Harold next, and then Linda for this answer.
The portion I read from the Bjorken sagas wasn't as much inspired as part of the craft. I wrote the sagas first, and it really wasn't working very well. The sagas are written from inspiration, from all of those emotions and feelings, but it needed a package. Needed something to carry it. So the portion that I read is the craft part of writing and creating structures.
And just before we started, you mentioned that this looks at the Swedish part of your family, your father's side, and I asked you, like, why now? Why, after 20 years of publishing books, have you just got to that? So if there's something you want to say about that.
Well, yeah, the first 10 books I wrote from a Cree perspective, from northern Saskatchewan, very closely rooted to that land, to that landscape, the spirits in that area. But I am half Swede. And after visiting Sweden, finding my father's ancestors, living relatives, and tracing my family tree back to 1580, felt he needed to be included in this story of mine. So the Bjorken Sagas does that for me. It draws on Swedish mythology and includes my father and those family members.
Wonderful, thank you. And Linda, I understand that these last couple of novels are heavily inspired by your own family, your own ancestors as well. Can you talk about inspiration and the story behind the story?
Yes, I can talk a lot about that because it hit me suddenly that I had all this sort of framework in my mind about my father's family, and it was pretty interesting stuff. But the one thing they had not talked about is that they were slave owners, back in the day, and they had. But what interested me was that the man who had bought the first slave was a Quaker, and that's Daniel, who I just read to you, traveling on this wagon. He's left Pennsylvania, and he's got a brand new, very young wife, rather shamefully young, and he's going down into Virginia to find himself a piece of land because the Quakers have disowned him. Now, they didn't disown him because of what he was about to do next. They disowned him because he'd married a non-Quaker. Quakers were very particular about how each person must live, and Daniel had made an error by marrying the nursemaid in his house after his wife died, which is something that men often did in early America. I mean, it just was a logical thing. He had all these kids. He had a bunch of kids, and one of them was 2 weeks old. And obviously, he can't keep living with the nursemaid unless he marries her, and so forth. So, it's really hard to blame him. But what we blame him for now, of course, is that he took this wagon load down into the tip of Virginia and bought a slave, and then over the years more. And as an ancestor, or I mean, as a descendant, not an ancestor, as a descendant of this man, I had to really wonder what that was like, because the Quakers were very anti-slave and very, ardently. They wouldn't wear indigo clothes because indigo was a plant that was processed by the slaves and so forth. So, it was a huge thing in Quakerism to be anti-slavery. And of course, they ran the Underground Railroad and all of that. So the fact that this man who'd grown up Quaker, who was fourth or fifth generation Quaker, could do this really interested me. And this is historically what happened. And I kept asking my father, well, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Well, you know, what happened? What happened? What would happen in his soul, in his brain, in his consciousness after he'd made that purchase? And what kind of responsibility does he have to that? Because he ended up buying really a child who was useless in terms of work, and in fact bought him probably out of some sort of pity, or who knows. But that's what this story is about. And then, of course, it led into the next book, which is the next saga of the family going west to Kansas. And so I guess what inspired me was what I knew to be factual, and then how did that actually feel? You know, what did those people, what did they think about themselves, and how did they live with themselves, and what kind of turmoil and trauma and delights, even joys, loves, did they process in their lifetimes? So I've got sort of, I don't know, 3 generations trickling through those 2 books, and I'm working on a later thing. It just seems sort of corny to write about the family, doesn't it? But I got bewitched by it.
I actually think that when we get some inspiration from our personal lives, from our ancestors, it can be pretty heady stuff. But I'd like to ask you a very different question here today. So without totally derailing this panel, is the concept of inspiration maybe kind of overrated or overplayed in a writer's life? Like there are some days when I don't rely on inspiration at all. I rely on like just tedious things like word counts and deadlines because I'm not feeling inspired. So I wonder if you could all just talk about on those days what inspires you when you don't have the juice to write, what gets you unstuck, what stokes the fire, and maybe this time I'll start with Linda and then go in the opposite direction.
All right, I'm sort of a bad example of a writer. And I try not to say this to younger writers, but I don't follow much of a schedule. I think I did when I first began on Daughters of Captain Cook, but you know, I started writing rather late. I was a single mother with 2 kids. I didn't have much time, and then it became obsessive. I mean, it was a kind of drug, you know. It was a place I could go that was mine, and it was like going into a little cozy, wonderful room, or not always so wonderful. And it was a way to explore my own brain, I think, my own. I mean, in those books, it was much more fictional, and that was fun. But I don't think inspiration has. I don't know if I understand the idea of inspiration. It's interest. It's interest. Like right now, I'm thinking a lot about World War II, and I'm really interested. And I read all kinds of things about it that have nothing to do with the story I'm writing. But it's just sort of become, you know, the thing that I dwell in.
So like maybe even like a preoccupying interest.
Yeah. And then you sort of convert that into your own, you know, shape. And figure out what you can use and what's moldable. But I don't know if that's the same as inspiration. Perhaps it is.
Harold, do you want to riff off of this?
I don't know much about inspiration either. That isn't the word that I use to describe what happens. It's passion.
Right, good.
I've got something that needs to be said, and it's going to come out, and I either put it on the page or it's going to rip my heart out. It's fire.
So it's survival too, then.
Yeah.
If you don't write it, you might not feel like you can survive.
In part, but that's also what made my writing good. When I wrote Firewater, it had to be written because nobody else was talking about it, and it had to be said. My younger brother had just been killed by a drunk driver, and my older brother had been killed by a drunk driver years before.
My God.
And I was seeing it every day in the courtroom. Just overwhelmingly, it was alcohol use that was driving all of the destruction in all of the communities that I visited. And it had to be said. And so it was sitting at the computer and writing something and getting up and telling yourself, you cannot write that. You cannot say that. And the voice says, but it's true.
Mm.
And you force your ass back into the chair.
Right. So you listen for the voice.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
And all of those deep emotions that are ripping you apart just get put into words. And that's what pulls you through.
Yeah.
I find that works. I mean, I learned that writing Firewater, but it is how I made it through all of the other work since. It's when you really, really feel it. It might be love, it might be anger, it might be hurt. But when you really, really feel it, then you can write it.
Okay, thank you. Peace, would you like to weigh in on what is inspiration? And what do you do when you don't have the juice?
Wow, everything that Earl said is amazing. I really do believe that it is passion that replaces inspiration. But one thing that has really been a big effect in my life with poetry is influence. And it is, for me, a lot of my work have to do with personalization of objects around me. That is how I view the world. Yeah, from a young age, I would, because we were left alone in the village, I would sit down and I would be with rocks and things would be going on all around me. I would not pay attention to what was going on, but I would listen to what they're saying. And even though I wasn't looking at them, I would look at the rocks in front of me and put their quality into the rocks. So the rocks became more of my friends than the actual people standing there. And it was a weird, quirky thing that I did as a kid. But as I grew up, it developed into a writing style for my poetry. And that's why influence is a big thing. Like when I sit down and when trees, I'm sitting down with trees, when I take a moment, a story is already forming just by the environment that is there. So people ask me that, what's your inspiration? And of course, it would be safe to say nature, but it's not really nature. It's how nature is relating to us, how nature is relating to everyone. It's not just talking about different kinds of trees. It's talking about the qualities that are in the trees that are also seen in humans, and that's the way that I view it. It's also a very big fact that whenever they ask a black poet or artist what their inspiration is, there it's the expected answer would be, oh, the politics that is going on and the world politics. But very rarely do I talk about those kind of things. Instead, I like to talk about self-love, inner turmoil that is going on, because if everyone feels that, no matter in the skin color, everyone has feelings of mental illness. The difference might be how you got that mental illness, but you still you still have it, right? So that's why there's a very mixed emotions with asking about what inspiration is, asking what's the story behind the work. I feel has more color, because of that. You have taken the work that the writer has done, you have looked at it, you have put your own interpretation, and now you want to hear their interpretation too, rather than the generalization of everything they work on. And yes, that's my take on inspiration.
And would you like to lead us off with talking about those days when you're not feeling the juice? What do you do to stoke your own fire to get whatever it is, whether it's the passion, whether it's the deep interest, the preoccupation, the all of those feelings? What gets
Yeah.
that going again?
I find that the days when I have no reason or no need to write, because there's always needs to be a need, for me to write. Rarely do I take commission work, unless the idea behind it is found like I need to write about it. But there are days when I do need to write and nothing is coming in me. So instead it's very cliche, but I do the 5 minute exercise where you just write for 5 minutes without stopping and looking back and getting all of the thoughts in. And I find like there is a wall in your brain. There's always a wall in your brain whenever you actually need to get things done. And by pushing that wall, you can actually get the idea behind it. So it's always that wall that I'm trying to fight against every single time. And it's again, for me, personalizing everything. It's going outside of yourself, almost a disassociative thing where I need to get something done and I need to write and I need to figure out the right words. So I go outside of myself looking in and be like, if I am on stage and there is an audience that really needs to hear this, what do they need to hear? What do you see yourself saying? And for some reason, that thought process works for me. Always thinking about that one person in the audience that needed to hear that. What did they need to hear? How is me being on stage, me writing, helping someone? What is the justification of me writing? And that logical thinking by looking outside of yourself kind of helps. But that is again very much a personal thing. I don't know if I would do it as a advice for young for writers, because that's just how I look at the world in my own view.
Yeah. Well, it's also, looking at purpose, right?
Mhm.
What is the point of this? What do people want to, what do they need to hear?
Mhm.
Yeah. Harold, would you like to weigh in on how you get things moving when you don't feel like it?
I don't know. Never been there. Doesn't happen. I've been writing since I was 4 years old. One of my first memories is on the floor with a brown paper bag and a stubby little pencil, and I was copying the words from the Winnipeg Free Press onto the paper bag, teaching myself to read and write. I've been a writer since my first memory. As a teenager, I wrote poetry. When I was in the Navy and in the mining camps, I wrote short stories. And through it all, I told myself I'm practicing. Practicing.
Yep.
I can remember writing dialogue just for the purpose of can I write just pure dialogue with nothing else? So just the audience is just a fly on the wall listening to a couple of guys bullshitting each other. And can I do that? That is practice. I have manuscripts on my computer that are never going to be published. They were practice. So
do you think that might be a part of what helps? I mean, it takes the pressure off to say this is practice versus, this is going to be on shelves next year.
Yeah, not everything is for publication. Some of it, if you love the guitar player, when he's sitting in his living room in the evening and he's playing a guitar and the recording isn't on, he still loves the music that he creates. So do I. When I sit down to write and I'm just playing, letting the words flow and just playing with it, I'm in love. And that's what keeps me going, is that love of writing. This is who I am. I can't change.
So I would say that needs to go on one of my sticky notes by my computer, like, remember that you're in love.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, not that you like it every day, but you're in love. Okay. Linda.
I was just thinking that I think that so many writers now go to writing schools. And they're, I think I've had some connection to some of those workshops and writing schools. And I think what happens is they get the writers become very tense, and they think about it being something they're going to put out the next 2 or 3 days to their comrades around the table. It's always public. And I think a lot of people have forgotten what Harold's saying is that I mean, for me too, it was so much of what I wrote until I got published in my 40s was private, private, private. I just wrote. I wrote all the time. And so it was a very easy process for me to connect words to my brain.
Yeah.
And then the idea of publishing and making public and making it readable for someone else was quite a different set of standards to think about and learn. I wasn't sure, I could make that jump into being a public writer, writing for someone else. An editor will say, well, that doesn't make sense, or this, why did you put this paragraph, and so forth. And, I wasn't used to that after years and years of sort of solitary closet writing. And I just wonder about writing schools I hope that, that young writers remember to write for themselves and write privately and secretly so that they find their own voice.
Wonderful.
I've been
Thank
asked
you.
to sit on juries, and you got over 100 submissions for support, and you're reading these submissions, and I always read the written work first before I even look at who the author is. I just
Yep.
want to, what did you write? Let me see this. And I'd read it, and I could tell if that person has a master's in fine arts and creative writing, because they were trying to impress me with their cleverness, and the writing wasn't very good. And then you go and check, and yeah, that's a creative writing person, and I give them no marks. But you could also tell the people who were in love with writing, the people who were just putting their hearts into it. They were like children playing in the playground, and it was beautiful to watch and beautiful to read.
Lovely. I just want to remind the audience that we can take questions. So please send your questions in. I'm sure you've got lots. And we want to make sure we get them because we only have about 10-ish, 13 minutes left. So please send your questions now. And I'll ask one more question until we get some audience questions. So tell me what your, I'm not going to say what's inspiring you for your next work. I'm going to say instead, what are you in love with? Or what is preoccupying you with? Or what are you feeling a lot of purpose in for your next project? Oh, I should call on one of you. Linda, sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting talking about the purchase and the following. I think what interests me now is what motivated certain people to live in a certain way, and sort of, as a child, you look at all the people around you and you just sort of accept who they are and who's screaming and who's not screaming, who's crying and who's laughing, and you don't think too much about why. But I think at this stage of my life, I'm getting very, very old, and I'm really interested in what makes people do what they do and how do they feel about it. And I guess it's the same thing that started with Daniel buying that slave. I mean, how could he possibly, except in perhaps desperation, have let himself break that code? And so I'm interested in my father, and my father's was a very angry man. Why was he so angry? What happened? And all that. And there's no way you're going to know. There's no way. I mean, I can't reach back into his mind at this point, but I can fiddle around with it and think about all the things and that's what interests me, I suppose. And I'm very interested in words on the page and how they sound and what you make of them and what kind of voice you bring to a certain passage. So that's what interests me. It's changed, I think, but not so much.
You're muted.
Sorry. Peace, what's next for you?
For me right now, it is trying to go out of the safe comfort bubble that I have with poetry, branching out into bringing poetry into music, dance, drama, theater. What is the limit that can go with that? Uh, One thing that I am working on is I have me and my partner were doing they're doing music, I'm doing poetry, but we're trying to intermix it into a monologue and a 1 hour monologue of music and poetry talking about our experiences, which is amazing. It's an amazing way to have two art medias in one room and try to hash out
So
one single thought.
is one of you a musician?
Yes.
I
Yes.
see. Oh,
Yes.
great. Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. So it's working really well because of we're able to like bring in this new effect. We don't really want it to be a well it's a song and then poetry is like intermixed in it. No, but how can we like try to bring in the actual values of what poetry is and what the actual values of music is, break it down into the basic and rearrange it
Sounds
and put it
fab.
all together. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Yeah,
Mm,
we're partnering with Shakespeare Saskatchewan to get that in. So yeah,
great.
um, l-
Beautiful.
yeah, that's one thing that I'm looking forward to doing this year. Because when you have the basics kind of down, what's next? There's
Yeah.
never an ending.
That's
There's
Yes,
never
there's
an
more to
ending.
learn.
Yeah.
hopefully there's not. Yeah.
And Harold, what's next?
I don't know if it'll be published. Doesn't matter. I am playing with some ideas. My very first published book was Billy Tinker, and that was about, well, it wasn't about, but it had little people in it from Cree mythology.
Uh,
So I'm back to writing about them. And I'm up 25,000 words. And maybe it's just practice. That, that's what I am.
Still practicing.
Still practicing. I am not going to write any more nonfiction. I am done with it. It hurt a
Mm.
lot. It took a lot out of me. And I don't want to do that anymore. Now I'm going to look after me. I'm going to write things that flow out of my heart gently.
mm,
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions, so let's get to them. And one just for Harold as well. So here's the question for all. What has been a favorite writing event for you to attend? Did you meet any interesting people or learn anything new or discover a new passion that you had not considered before? So anything you'd like to share from events? Harold, do you want to jump in?
I went to the Festival of Literary Diversity,
Mm.
and I've been to lots of writers' events and rarely go to any sessions. I come and I do my thing and visit around and like meeting the artists. For Literary Diversity, I attended many of the sessions and learned so much because there was people there like me, and I felt connected and home.
Yeah. If anyone wants to know more about that, that's the Festival of Literary Diversity, FOLD for short, and it's based in Brampton, and they're amazing. So, Peace, do you want to say anything about events?
Yeah, I did a recent one. It was online, and by this point, I've already done 20 plus online shows. I was kind of like, oh, okay, one more to put in there. But it was the Living Stories Under the Living Sky by the Regina Creative Center, and it was for the culture. It was for Culture Day in Saskatchewan, and so the cast and the panel was all BIPOC people, all from refugee or immigrant status, which was amazing to see. The host for it actually took her time out of her way, even though she lived in different in a different city than us, drove all the way and spoke to each of us individually, tried to hear our stories, came to us and talked to us, just for lunch or for a little coffee. Even though we were going to go online, we still got to see the host face to face. And in the when we were doing the panel, she talked about a little bit of a story, gave us time to talk about it. And when we were doing our performances, in the end of it, she would take little lines from it, and we would talk about that even more. So it was a very vulnerable show, like the most vulnerable I've been in, because of we really talked about everything, and we had like the time and the space to talk about everything that we have been through in a non-tokenism space, if that makes sense. And it felt like a conversation of other like-minded people, just talking about it rather than here is my trauma. Take it. It was more of, yeah, I've been through that. Yeah, you've been through that. Ah, ha, 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 ha. Funny, that kind of thing. And it was really great. It rejuvenized me into what online spaces could be, instead of looking at all of this as just being on the computer. It was talking with people, and that has helped me more when I'm going through this again. So yeah.
Great. Okay. And Linda, anything you want to say about
I have
events?
I have a quite different thing that I want to talk about in terms of festivals. I think the most memorable for me was a festival I attended in Jaffna in India. And it was extraordinary because it was so huge in terms of the audience. And people came on foot, every age. And I remember in particular running into a man coming in through the gates, and he had a small child with him. And I stopped and asked about his, I don't know why I stopped and talked to him. His kid couldn't go to school. They didn't have a school for that child. You know, children in India don't necessarily get to go to school. But he wanted his child to hear about books and to hear people reading from books.
Oh.
And it was like that. It was so human, and everyone sat on the grass, and people were absolutely devoted, and they knew what they were hearing. They might be hearing Shakespeare or whatever, but they were totally brilliantly intelligent about it. But it was so massively, I don't know, not elite is the only way I can think to put it. Even though the writers and so forth were fabulous, the audience was so real and so present and so ready to take it in, so hungry. You know, it was a great experience to have people care that much, you know, to hear. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I've just gotten the warning that we need to end. And I just want to say a little plug for this festival, because I had the opportunity to come 5 years ago to Moose Jaw, and it's such a small festival in some ways that if we had been in person, we would have hung out, and we would have probably learned and laughed with one another. And I want to just say a little plug for that, because I remember hanging out with a small group of authors 5 years ago and in forming connections that lasted a very long time. So may we keep in touch, and I should just do my wrap up stuff. So just a reminder to everybody that the festival is working with McNally, Robinson, and Post Horizon booksellers locally to coordinate book sales. And, you know, one of the best ways to honor writers, besides coming to these kinds of things, is to purchase a book if there is one in the bookstore. So please make sure that you check out both of those bookstores, also on the festival website. And a special thank you to all of you for being here today and being so present with your answers, being so lovely. It was really an honor to moderate this panel. So thank you, all of you. And also thank you to Amanda and to Emily, who have been working so hard in the background here as well.
And thank you, Farzana, because you're wonderful. You're a great moderator.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us for Festival 2021, our 25th anniversary. Before we go, we just have a few quick announcements. First, a thank you to our wonderful volunteers and staff, specifically Sarah Simison, our executive director, Lucinda McLean, our admin assistant, and our interns, Arietta Corey, Emily Pinter, and Joel Larson. We also are thrilled to announce a quick tease for our lineup for next year. We will be seeing the likes of Will Ferguson, Michelle Good, and in a special virtual appearance, Emma Donahue. We are also thrilled to also announce the return of our book launch session at the festival, which this year will be with a newly revitalized Thistledown Press, and you'll be able to see their lineup for the next year after this message. So thank you all for coming, and we hope you had a wonderful time. Well, that's